Hey everyone, and welcome back to Deeper Roots. One of the things that has been constant through the flow of all human history has been art and self-expression. Among those things has been a little something called music. People use music all the time to express the things that they care about, whether it's heartbreak and loss, joy or love, or any intense emotion. People have been built to sing and dance and feel with so much intensity. And that's an expression of something that we, as humans, have been given. Now, within song, people have divided the medium up into different genres, one of which that we're talking about today, Christian music, specifically modern Christian contemporary music. Why? Because in CCM's history, there has been two sides debating on whether or not modern Christian music is capable of glorifying God, and also which songs are good praise to God. The question of the week is God glorified in Christian contemporary music? The way the original submission was worded was, how do we distinguish which contemporary Christian bands actually honor God and which don't? That's a very valid concern, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We talk about the trends of modern Christian music. We talk about what makes a Christian song actually glorifying to God, and a whole lot more. Before I get into the episode, I will note that this recording actually went very long. So we're going to have to cut this one into two parts. One release this week and one release next week. If you're listening later, then you don't have to worry about it. But we will continue this conversation next week, right from the get-go. So if you don't want to miss the second part of this episode, I encourage you to just go ahead and follow the podcast, whether it's subscribing on YouTube or it is following the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you know someone who's interested in Christian music, or maybe someone who isn't interested at all, share this with them. Maybe they can gain some perspective on their side. If you want to ask a question about something that we talked about today, or maybe just any question at all, I encourage you to please submit a question at www.ibbvn.org/deeperroots. Thank you for joining us here on Deeper Roots. Now let's get to the conversation. Welcome back to Deeper Roots. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Today we have myself, Derek, we have Pastor Luis, and we have Esther. The question for today is God glorified in contemporary Christian music? And to clarify, the way that the person asked the question was, how do we distinguish which contemporary Christian bands actually honor God and which don't? This is a topic that I really am involved in. I really enjoy talking about this, but I also really don't like talking about it because I have Christian music is my favorite music in general. Mm-hmm. I have a love for Christian music, but I can't bring myself to listen to so much of it because I just get so disappointed time after time whenever I listen. So this is a conversation that I like to be in. So Pastor, do you want to talk about it?
All right. Well, it seems like on the podcast lately, we've been just having these really, I guess, hot topics. Yeah. Hot topics, not only because of their importance, but also because they tend to be a little polemic, a little controversial, and this is no exception when it comes to the topic of Christian music. Off the bat, I know there's going to be people that listen to this podcast that probably won't agree with one thing or another that we say. But I always see this podcast as an opportunity to share our position and why we believe what we believe. And if you know anything about me as a pastor, one very recurring theme with me, I've mentioned this in many occasions, is about the importance to find what two extremes exist in any kind of issue. Because any kind of issue that we might discuss, you'll always have to look at what the two extremes are, because that'll help you out at least to identify the things that are not going to be the right position. Because in any position, you have two extremes. You have two sides of the same coin that are not exactly what God says, and the devil loves to pull people towards the extremes of any issue. And like I always represent it as like riding a horse. You know, the goal of riding a horse is to stay on the horse, to ride the horse. If you fall off the right side or the left side, it doesn't matter. You still fall off the horse. So being on the horse in that illustration to me is finding that biblical center, the biblical truth to any issue. And I think there's no exception to this issue when it comes to music, right? And especially the contemporary version of music that is out there, of Christian music. So I would maybe start with that. What would you guys identify as the two extremes in this issue?
I think one extreme is definitely like the like hymns only kind of churches, where like it's only like the old like 1800s, like no, not even like 1500s, 1600s.
I thought you were gonna go into the 1980s, and I was like, don't do that.
No, the only like 1500s, 1600s. And then I think the other side would be like the very modern, but like in my opinion, just not great, like the music that just has the same words over and over again. Mm-hmm. Also a lot of like there's a lot of like the drums, and there's a lot of other elements going on that I don't even know how to describe those, that kind of music, like just like rock based,
worldly based style music that the only difference that they've changed the lyrics to somewhat Christian, because even some of them amongst those kind of musics, you find some that try to sort of really forcefully fit in some lyrics that hopefully you can make out through all the rhythm and the craziness. And then there's others that don't even try. They don't. It's very watered down, like you say. A lot of 7-Elevens, 7 words repeat.
Now that you brought that up, I already have to define what that is. 7-Eleven is the same 7 words 11 times.
Exactly, 7 words 11 times.
He got that from me.
And so then when it comes to that, when it comes to the extremes, let's talk about that first extreme that you mentioned. The churches,
like only the old music is good.
What have you guys heard about that? I'll share a couple of experiences that I've had, with growing up in church. I've had people come up and tell me that if it's not in a hymn book, it's not glorifying God. Mm-hmm. That there is, I've actually heard this position, that all the music that God ever intended to be used for worship has already been written. Because one day I remember there was a guy, a friend of mine, who loved playing piano and he liked composing. And a pastor, which would remain nameless, came up and slapped his hand and said, "Hey, you have no permission to be creating any new music. All the music that has ever been intended to worship God has already been intended." And I think that's just, wow, that's
an extreme.
Extreme. Mm-hmm. I mean, where in the Bible does that have support? On the contrary, the Bible says sing to the Lord a new song. A new song. In other words, that has to be something that really is fresh and meaning. And yes, God's going to have the gift of composers, to create new songs as well. That's great. That's one of the positions. What else have you heard as far as that side of hymns only?
Yeah, I actually just recently I met up with some friends about a week ago, and one of my friends, they said that that their church, this church says that like there's a line, and like basically the line is like the Christian Getty music. Mm-hmm. I don't know why that line is where I don't know why that's where they drew the line, but basically if it's not a hymn, then it's bad. Mm-hmm. But also at the same time, if it is a hymnized version of a newer song, like if you get a newer song and then you write it for just piano, it's still not good because it's inspired by the newer music. Mm-hmm. And that's also kind of wild, because if the way that I think Christian music is defined as Christian music, it's about what it's saying and not necessarily I mean there's a whole bunch of different aspects to it, but if the what is saying is being already emphasized, then if it becomes just piano and you have words that glorify God in the music, and the words aren't, and the music, the piano isn't distracting to the music, then
there's also the association factor that gets brought up. If a song is written by a certain person or a certain group that then later on has a bad testimony, that is it okay to use it or not? There's a lot of things being discussed in that realm. So I guess that would be one side of the extreme. The other side of the extreme, Esther, what have you heard of as far as that?
I think we hear a lot of younger generations saying, I need something that I like and I listen to, and the beat, and for their generation they don't understand the hymns, or they don't like it, they're boring. So I hear a lot of that from the other extreme. And I think taking the liberal, for the liberal word as it is, using all instruments, the purpose is different. We're not jumping into that yet, but the lack of connection sometimes with the younger generation, saying, this music doesn't speak to me, I need this instead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so much on that side of the spectrum, because it's not like we said in the English world, it'd be more like Christian rap, Christian rock, and all that's different genres. But I mean, for us being Hispanic, we all also jump into things that just are so crazy to us, like merengue and salsa, and it just slapped the Christian label on it, and it's supposed to be glorifying to God. And I think that's really what we're here to talk about, because even when Derek was asking about the title, we chose that title. Does it glorify God? Is it something that really brings the glory and is pleasing to God? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, at the end of the day, is God being pleased in the way we're worshiping Him, And I want to start maybe with just a little anecdote, and I think I've mentioned this before, that I used to grow up listening to a lot of rock and a lot of worldly music, but then when I was about maybe Derek's age, a little younger, God started talking to my heart and saying, I really need to feed myself better with better music, because there is an element of communication, and that we're going to talk about that. I think there's so much to talk about, but because the music is really a language. It's a universal language. It's about what it communicates. And what I started noticing is that my rebellious spirit, my tendencies, my sinful nature was on overdrive a lot because of the things I was listening to. And I switched over to Christian music, but it was more of the CCM type, and one of my favorite bands was Jars of Clay growing up and stuff. And I remember driving one day from work and listening to their song called Unforgetful You. And if you listen to that song, it's really rhythmic, it's really upbeat, and I remember thinking, man, I love this song. But then I just remember feeling in my heart like God saying, why do you like it? And to be honest, I could not remember what the song was about. All I could remember is the lyrics to the chorus. Unforgetful you, unforgetful you, unforgetful you. So I'm like, what does it really say? So that's when really hit me the conviction. I'm like, how can this be glorifying to God? If the purpose of listening to this is to glorify Him, to worship Him, how can I be worshiping Him if really I have no clue what this song's talking about? So that sort of started molding my convictions a little bit more as far as music is involved. So I think, there's that two sides of the spectrum. But even when we try to go into the middle, we're going to have to discuss that there is going to be also room for variation. Like, for example, you mentioned some churches draw a line at the Gettys, right, which is a group, and they have that right if that's how they feel comfortable, and they feel as a church they feel that's the line they want to draw. That's fine, as long as they don't preach it as doctrine, right? The Bible says thou shalt not listen beyond Getty. That doesn't say that. But there is room for personal conviction, and there is room for also preferences as churches evolve. But if we're going to discuss about what does the Bible say, I think that's where we need to start. So what do you think as far as what should we talk about as far as what the Bible says as far as guidance to what is worship that glorifies God?
I think that I want to go into more of the example that David presents. Like, if you don't know, the book of Psalms, a lot of it is written by King David. for the listener. And there's a lot of those psalms are very obviously they're very poetic. He was a songwriter. He used his songs to use this opportunity to write songs to both praise God, to ask for help, to submit himself to God. And I think like just those if we were thinking about just his example, not only just being a strong songwriter and poet and lyricist, and just having these strong tendencies to like be additive and being constructive with your words, it just all has to direct toward God. There is place for testimonial songs, but if it doesn't point back to God, then it isn't really Christian.
Mm-hmm. That's so true, because some songs you listen to, some versions of Christian music, and you could easily be sung to anything to someone, to a team that you love, to a girlfriend. There's no distinction really. Right?
There's a funny subgenre of like a joke genre, like not joke, like it's a satire genre. What people call not even satire. Sorry, I'm rambling again. It's called the Jesus is my boyfriend kind of songs.
Oh Lord.
Whereas like if you just if you take away the context that this is a Christian band or a Christian song, or maybe you move the one time they say the name Jesus in the song, you can sing it to a boyfriend.
Exactly.
Or you can sing it to a girlfriend. It just it's the same song no matter what. And sometimes it's even inappropriate if you think about like just the different sensual kind of words that people say in those songs, but it's taken in the context of it being Jesus Christ, so it's okay. Like it's more damaging to people who aren't Christian who listen to it out of context than it is helpful to a person who is listening to it in context.
Exactly. I've heard you mention this before too, that you are very what's the word, zealous, I guess. Zealous about also the lyrical composition being artistic. Could you explain a little bit more about that? Because I think that's an interesting point. And again, I think this might fall a little bit more into the preference, but we're going to go get into the whole. I have 3 points I wanted to share, biblical principles that I think have served me and the church as far as where we sort of follow as far as our musical doctrine, if we want to call it that. But I think what you have to say about that is really interesting too, and I think there is merit to it. What is it?
One of the biggest parts for me is the fact that I think that Christian music needs to be both additive and constructive. They're basically the same thing, but whichever way helps you understand the concepts better. If you look at, I think it's Psalm 126, I can't remember, but it is the psalm where David is talking, or like is singing or making the psalm, and every other line it says, and his love endures forever, or his mercies endures forever. His mercies endure forever, and it keeps on going along those lines. And people have actually talked to me and used that psalm as an example of like, oh, but like these songs where it just says hallelujah the entire time, you can go back to that psalm and say like, oh, but it's so it's okay because David did it. But then I turn back to them, read every other line that isn't his mercies endure forever. And it is additive. It is constructive. There is a new thought in between every line. It is a new thought that later points back to the chorus, his mercies endure forever. It is an additive, it is something that is constructive to the idea. It isn't something that is just like a lame duck. So that's one of the bigger points. I think that's also like in terms of distraction, you can get so wrapped up in instrumentals and you can get so wrapped up in the rhythm of it, like you said with the Jars of Clay song, that at some point you are going to you're gonna have to strain to hear the singer yelling.
What is he talking about?
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
So it's
but
like those two
I like
basic
that
things.
point because when you talked about that, and I've thought more about it, it's true, because when it comes to music, and music, if we say, okay, this is music, we're going to sing because we're worshiping God. It's an offering to God. it's a present to God, then we should put our best into it. We should really put our best creative ability into it. And sometimes when it comes to a lot of CCM today, you listen to it and you could hear it's just basically just the same kind of rhythm as any other song, sort of pre-packaged and change the lyrics a little bit. Not much artistic thought goes into the lyrics, into the substance of the lyrics, and it's just sort of like I hate to compare it this way, but you could see the quality of products today.
Yeah,
you're like, and you compare it to products in the 50s where it was well made, and now things are like just falling apart. That's the same thing you notice a lot in just because they just want to get it out there, because they just want to make money.
That's also a society thing, because in the world that we live in, not in the secular music, they're doing the same thing. They're just cut and pasting. I mean, there's a lot of critique of lot of critique of you don't really use their voice, they use all this other stuff.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things even in the secular or worldly department. You could see that difference. There are artists that really put their artistic energies into creating good lyrics or whatever, or lyrics, but and then the same thing, there's like the other songs that they just prefabricate and put out just to try to make an easy buck, and that unfortunately should be non-existent when it comes to music for God.
Exactly.
And I think that's where your point is so good, because I do believe if God didn't create anything like that, he created things with intention, with creativity, with effort, with his best. He didn't just do a half-done job and say, let's see if it works. And I think that's if we're talking about worship and Christian music being something that should represent our best for the Lord, I think that definitely needs to be reflected in the quality of the song that's being presented to God.
And I think that you can think about the prefabrication of these things as like the words are just being chosen because they sound good together, right? I'm thinking. Do you mind if I actually mention like an artist name?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry. Sorry for any fans of this.
We do not support anybody here.
We don't support anybody here.
Disclaimers.
Yeah, but like Chris Tomlin. You listen to a lot of his songs and like they sound great. They sound good, right? There's a reason why he has a huge following. But I can bring up at least 2 examples. If I listen to him more, I probably could bring up more. But at least 2 examples where it's just there are words said that are either they don't make sense or they're damaging to the actual message of what we need to be talking about. The first one I'm going to bring up is a more neutral one. It's in the song "I Will Rise." I used to love the song. It used to be in my like playlists all the time because it was it sounded like such a nice song. It's an older one, but someone brought up to me the line in the song that just says "Victory has won," and that's kind of like, yeah. I mean, you could say those words sound all right together, but like they don't make sense. Like it's victory. Like victory. It's inherently it's a winner, right? So victory has won just doesn't make sense, and when a non-Christian person brings that up to you, and they bring it like, okay, so this is the reason why I don't listen to this stuff. This is the reason why it's kind of trash, right? So like it is a reason for someone to grab onto and to just generalize the whole thing is bad. And the same way how the rest of society works, right? The second song is one that I actually really don't like. And I hope that you can help me find a way to not dislike it so much. But it's another song by Chris Tomlin called Good, Good Father. We've talked about it before. But there is a point of the song where he's talking about, I think it's during the chorus, I want to find, I for some reason I can't remember the actual the words for it, but it's talking about how how God loves us because of us.
That's
I'll find the words for it if you while you talk, but the point is
that there's sometimes, I think your point, what you're saying is that sometimes lyrics there's not much thought put into it as far as the value of being doctrinally correct. And they have to be doctrinally correct, especially if you're teaching something like that, like he loves us because of who we are. that goes into murky waters.
I found it.
Because he loves us because we're his creation, and that's
He
true.
loves us because he first.
He loves us not because of an inherent how much we've done for him or because we serve him. He loves us despite of us. I think that's the best explanation.
You're a good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. And here's where the words come in. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. And that is pretty much the entire context, because the entire chorus is taken away from the rest of this. There's no like ongoing story like how in some hymns there is. But no, this is a that's the full context of it. Hey, production Derek here. Don't usually do this, but I want to give a quick note. It's after the podcast recording that I recognize that I'm allowing myself to get worked up about this song, Good Father. I need to note that the rest of the song has an excellent message, and my criticisms might be unwarranted. I still maintain my reservations about the song due to that line that I mentioned, but my opinion shouldn't be taken as law. I love Christian music, and because of that, I have such a high standard for it. While this song hasn't reached that standard for me, that doesn't mean it can't be a blessing in your life. And that's it. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, and it's in quite a contrast to another song that comes to mind, Who Am I? Which Who Am I is definitely much more thought out as far as the lyrics. Who am I that the Lord of all the earth would care to know my name, would care to feel my hurt? Because who are we for God to love us? And that's what really, like you said, we first love God. We love God because he first loved us. So I think, lyrical content and quality needs to represent really our best for the Lord in whatever music we
And I think as
to.
believers, we need to understand there's a purpose for everything, as you were talking earlier. And if the purpose of music being the language that it is, the type of language that it is, we need to sift through music and realize, is this getting to the point, or is it just making me feel good?
Exactly.
Because that's what music does. Music can make you feel awesome or sad, and it's great. I love music because it can make
so
you
visceral.
It could, I love the old Disney movies because they use that a lot with the music, right? To make you feel, and like old movies, they did that, and it was awesome because you could feel it. Like anyone put on Star Wars music, and everyone's like, the beginning, and you're like, oh, here it comes, right? You know it's coming. So God created it for a purpose. With all, God is a God of emotions as well. He created those, and they're meant to be used together with a purpose when it comes to music. And it's us realizing as believers, sift all the music with that purpose. Like why am I happy? Just because of the beat? Or because of what it's the message? Is it pointing to Jesus, or is it just me yelling from the top of my lungs, whatever you may be doing?
Is it about him, or is it about me?
Correct.
Is it a concert, or is it a worship service? That's one of the two things I try to think about in those points about how music is really that what's it called, the universal language communicates emotion. When people who create films or create movies, they know that. And there's a person dedicated just to composing music to communicate what's going on in the scene, to communicate the feeling behind the scene. Think like right now you've been watching The Chosen, right? And there's some scenes there that's like really get to you, It's like
they can.
I saw one where Jesus or his mom goes and helps him, but the music that they play behind is the one that's getting your emotions, like to really connect with what's going on the screen, So I think that's important. And so then that is a consideration we have to really be aware about when we're worshiping God. Is this music really communicating humility, worship, and all that stuff? And I think that's where I want to go with the principles I want to share with you, and then maybe we can bring up any follow-up questions.
Sure.
But in John chapter 4, when God speaks to the Samaritan woman, he tells her something that I think is worth for us to remember in this kind of context when it comes to to worshiping God. And it says right here in verse 23, but the hour is coming and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So there's two elements that I think is the first boundary that I set as far as where our music selections here at church is. Number one, that has to be spiritual in nature. It has to connect to our spirit, not to our flesh. Spirit, and then truth. It has to connect, it has to communicate truth. So it goes back to the lyrical content. Is it doctrinal? Is it stating something that is true and that we're elevating truth through what we're singing, or is it just any any kind of lyrics just to fill in the void, right, of the musical content? So that worship, and we have to worship in spirit and truth, and it says you must. It doesn't say it's an option. It says you must, right? So that's the first thing: spiritual connection with the music, not fleshly. And number two, that it communicates truth, right? And then there's another verse here in 1 Corinthians. I think we're familiar with this one here. And 1 Corinthians 14:40. Let me go there real quick. 1 Corinthians 14:40, that says this. It says, let all things be done decently and in order. So that's another boundary for me. It has to be spiritual nature, has to communicate truth, but it also has to be decent. It says all things be done in decency, right? And it says we have to have order in what we do. Sometimes some of the music is so disorderly that's out there today that it just creates disorder in a church. Chaos. Jumping around and a hoopla, when it should be something that is done with decency and in order. There's a reason why music for a wedding is ceremonial and beautiful. It's because it's an important event that's going on, or the graduation of a class of military class that's graduating. You have the pomp and circumstance and all that good stuff,
live band and everything.
Because it's the importance of what's going on. It has order to it. It has decency to it. Very different from music you would hear at the ballpark just to get you going. So I guess we would ask ourselves, what is going on in church? Is it more like a ballpark, or is it more like a ceremony with importance? And I think the answer is obvious. And then the third verse that I always go to is in Colossians 1:18, where it says that he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, and that in all things he might have the preeminence. So even in music, does he have the preeminence? And I think that's where, again, if the rhythm, if anything else is overpowering to the lyrics, then he's not having the preeminence in that song. What's meant there to worship him is not the rhythm. It's not the music. That's just there to accompany it. What worships the Lord is the actual lyrics. So then that has to have preeminence over anything else. If I can't even understand it or make it out, questionable if it's really worship,
or if you can even get the message after you finish listening to it, like with that Jars of Clay song.
Yeah, exactly. What does it talk about? So I think within these three parameters, I think that's what's really served our church well, as far as what music we allow, what music we don't allow. But even amongst those three barriers, if you put them out, there's going to be a lot of room for variance between churches. Some churches say no, just Gettys are borderline.
Getty's the line. You can't go past that.
Fine, But I sort of guide myself by those three boundaries. But then the question is, should we also take in consideration association? We haven't talked about that.
That was one of my follow-up questions.
Okay, go ahead.
So I feel like before we get to that specific question, I think we can take a little bit of time to give like a short, firm answer on the actual question that came up. How do we distinguish which contemporary Christian bands actually honor God and which don't?
Like I said, John chapter 4. Is it spiritual in nature? Does it conduce or does it communicate to your spirit, to getting you closer to the Lord? That's why, even going back to Jars of Clay, There's a lot of songs out there that I used to love, and then they don't meet these criteria. But there's one that we even sing today in church, which is Hymn. Hymn, because what it says is so true. O gaze of love, so melt my pride, that I may in your house but kneel, and in my brokenness to Christ bring worship unto you. Worship has to make us humble and to communicate our ideas and thoughts and emotions into God. So that's what I mean by is it spiritual in nature. So that's thing, and is it communicating truth. Second, is it decent and in an order. Number 2, and number 3, is Christ being preeminent in the song? Is the lyrics in the song being exalted above the rhythm and above anything else accompanying it? So I think those are good guidelines that you can use to see if something is really worshiping.
Thank you for listening to the first part of this 2-part episode of Deeper Roots. If you want to submit a question, follow up on something we talked about in the podcast, or you just want to find us online, you can go to our webpage, which is ibbvn.org/deeperroots. Deeper Roots is a ministry of Iglesia Biblica Baptista Vida Nueva, which is a local church in Castro Valley, California. And you can learn more about us and our church by going to our website, ibbvn.org.